Hey there, Seahawks, it's Miss Adams, and in this video, we're going to talk about the quadratic formula. Alright, so the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Alright, so we have a little song that kind of goes with it, and so it's negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Why we use this? Well, some problems we can't be solved by factoring. So our traditional method we won't be able to use, and so we can use the quadratic formula. What's also nice about the quadratic formula is it works for all types of problems that you need to find the solutions for. So if you need to find the solutions or the roots or the zeros, because they're all called the same thing, then you can always use the quadratic formula and get the answer. Alright, so standard form of a quadratic is ax squared plus bx plus c. So before we start working with a quadratic, we need to get it in standard form first. And it is possible that we could get no solution, one solution, or two solutions when using the quadratic formula. Alright, so find the roots, zeros, or solutions. They all mean the same thing. So I have x squared plus 10x minus 2 equals 0. So you always want to make sure that your equation is set equal to 0 and that it's in standard form, which mine is. So then I'm going to pull out the a, b, and c. So remember it was ax squared plus bx plus c. So there's a 1 in front of the x squared. That's an a. The 10 is a b, and the negative 2 is a c. So I'm going to write those off to the side. Now I'm going to plug those into my formula. Again, my formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So negative b would be negative 10 plus or minus the square root of b squared would be 10 squared minus 4 times a times c, which is negative 2, all over 2 times a, which is 1. Alright, so now I'm going to just do order of operations. So I'm going to start inside of my square root, and I'm going to do parentheses, exponents, multiplication or division, addition or subtraction. So I can do 10 squared, that's going to make 100. And then if I do negative 4, because that's a minus 4, so negative 4 times 1 times negative 2 gives me positive 8. And 2 times 1 is 2. So I did kind of a few steps at once, and that's okay. Now I can add the numerators. 100 plus 8 gives me 108. 108 divided by 2 gives me 54. So I have negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 54. Now 54 is not a perfect square, so a lot of times you would just leave your answer like this. However, you can do 54 in your calculator and press the square root button, and then subtract it from negative 10 and add it with negative 10. And you end up with x equals negative 17.3485 and x equals negative 2.6515. Okay, so that's if you actually plug in negative 54 into your calculator and you figure out what it is as a decimal, and then you add and subtract in the negative 10. Okay, next problem, find the root, zeros, or solutions. Alright, so this problem is actually not set equal to 0, and it's not in standard form for a quadratic. So I need to move the 4x to the other side, and I actually want it to go in the middle. So I'm going to move the 4x to the other side of the equal sign, and I'm going to rearrange it. So it's going to be x squared minus 4x minus 11 equals 0. So now I can pull out a, b, and c. A is 1, b is negative 4, and c is negative 11. And I'm going to again use the quadratic formula. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So I'm going to plug that in. Negative b, well, b is already a negative. So if I do negative negative 4, that becomes positive 4. And then plus or minus the square root of b squared, so that's going to be negative 4 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is negative 11, all over 2a, so 2 times 1. So negative 4, I'm doing negative 4 times negative 4 when I square it. So negative 4 squared becomes 16. And then negative 4 times 1 times negative 11 becomes positive 44, all over 2. 16 plus 44 gives me 60. And 60 divided by 2 gives me 30. So I have 4 plus or minus the square root of 30. Then again, I could change this into a decimal. If I do the square root of 30, I get a decimal. And I would do 4 plus that decimal and 4 minus that decimal number. And I would get negative 1.477 and 9.477. All right, number 3, I have x squared minus 8x equals 20. Again, this is not set equal to 0, so I need to move the 20 over to the other side. So I'm going to move 20 over, and that's going to give me x squared minus 8x minus 20 equals 0. So I can pull out a, b, and c. A is the number in front of the x squared, b is the number in front of the x, and c is your constant, the one that doesn't have any letters. All right, so a is 1, b is negative 8, and c is negative 20. I'm going to plug that into the quadratic formula. So negative b, negative b, and my b is already negative, it's going to be negative negative 8, which makes it positive 8, plus or minus the square root of b squared. B is negative 8, so negative 8 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is negative 20, all over 2 times 1. Negative 8 squared becomes 64. Negative 4 times 1 times negative 20 becomes positive 80. And 2 times 1 becomes 2. 64 plus 80 gives me 144. 144 divided by 2 gives me 72. So I can do 8 plus the square root of 72 and 8 minus the square root of 72. Okay, and I get negative 0.485 and 16.485. All right. So now we're going to go ahead and if we can find the solution real easy, we'll do that. If it's not a perfect square, we're just going to leave it with the solution like a number plus or minus the square root. All right, so x squared plus 6x plus 10, it's in standard form. It's set equal to 0. So I'm going to pull out a, b, and c. A is 1, b is 6, c is 10. All right, so I have negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. 6 squared is 36. Negative 4 times 1 times 10 gives me negative 40 over 2. All right, when I do 36 minus 40, I get a negative. And when I divide that by 2, I still get a negative. Now, in this class, in Algebra 1, we can't take the square root of a negative because it gives us a number that's not in the real number system. So this one, there is no real solution, okay? Because the square root, under the square root, there's a negative. All right, so we would say there's no real solutions. There are complex roots or imaginary solutions, but you'll learn about that in Algebra 2. All right, number 5. Oops, I already went ahead. 2x squared minus 8 equals 0. Now this one, of course, you could use the quadratic formula, but we're going to just go ahead and move the 8 over to the other side. We get 2x squared equals 8, divided by 2, and we get x squared equals 4. And then I can just take the square root of both sides, and I get x equals positive and negative 2. Okay, so that's using the square root method, and that would be the easiest way to solve this. You could use the quadratic formula, and you would end up getting the same thing. It just would be a lot more steps. So it does help if you can look at the problem and kind of figure out which strategy would be the best for this problem. All right, this one, 4x squared plus 9 equals 12x. All right, I got to move the 12x to the other side. So I end up with 4x squared minus 12x plus 9 equals 0. I'm going to pull out my a, which is 4, my b, which is negative 12, and my c, which is 9. I'm going to plug that into the quadratic formula. So it's negative b, well, b is already a negative, so that becomes positive 12, plus or minus the square root of b squared, well, negative 12 squared, minus 4, times a, which is 4, times c, which is 9, all over 2 times a, which is 4. Negative 12 squared becomes positive 144. Negative 4 times 9 gives me 144, minus 144. And 2 times 4 gives me 8. Well, when I do 144 minus 144, I get 0. 0 divided by 8 is 0. So I end up with 12 plus or minus 0. 12 plus 0 is 12, and 12 minus 0 is 12. So I have one solution, and it is 12. X equals 12. All right, that's it.